Hey everyone. So last in the last video we saw a more fleshed out YAML config file, and we got into loggers and their level, specifically that when you set the logging level to not set on a logger, not on a handler, because if you do not set on a handler or zero, because all of these are enums and it's actually just integers. But if you set the logging level to zero, essentially, for a handler, the logging level is to just log everything. For a logger, what it will interpret that as being that the logging level is not set and I need to go up the logger hierarchy to see who does have it set and then import or mimic their levels. So if you set a logger level to zero, that's what it's going to do. And if it's high up enough in the hierarchy, it's going to go to root, and from root it's only going to get warning, right? Warning is the only logging level. It is the logging level of the root logger. And the way to have flexibility on your other loggers and app is to make sure that you set uh, the root logger to be zero or not set. And even then, the lower bound is actually 1. 0 still doesn't get printed. It's a bit strange. At least I felt it was a bit strange. And I also showcased a little bit about the .env file stuff, wherein I installed python.env and loaded in the environment variable for logging level in that file. So going on from that, basically what we're going to do is showcase what I've done since then. And we're just going to start from the main code. So what I had mentioned, so ignore this stuff, we're going to get into it in a moment. But over here in the last video I showcased and I talked about the existential crisis I had regarding whether or not I wanted to have python.env as a dev dependency, and I on the fly thought up like, hey, we should just use like some sort of environment variable. So now I'm just gonna clear this real quickly. If I just basically I set the environment variable just before I invoke the run, which does not, if I'm correct, if I do env, because I just had this running a moment ago, I don't see env underscore file. Let me just double check. Let me do this, and then let me exit out of it. It needs the app to finish startup, and I'm going to get into what this giant error is in a moment. But it's related to logging. I actually already fixed the error. I just commented out the stuff that caused the error, and so that just made it's just a bit difficult. So here, let us check env now. Term, program, shell, term, tempter, term, program version, term session, user, SSH, auth, socket, password, XPC, home, log name, secure, So no, env file essentially gets passed to UV run right then and there. So, and that's the only environment file that I will actually environmental variable, and from here on out I'll just put everything that I need in my .env file, and the reason for that is it just makes dev easier to have like all of my environment variables in one place that I can see, and then that way I can, because I've added it to git ignore, it's not going to actually show up. So anyways, if with the env file set, it loads .env, the env file environment variable, and so that made it that I moved python.env into a dev dependency. So that was a pretty straightforward thing to do. Next, Let me just scroll down and see what differences there were in the main code because I just rewatched my own video. So there's extra data here, path operation, get root. We'll get into what that is in a moment. This is just a random dict for now, but its power will show up later. Set logging config, set level config. I've already showcased that to you before. This is different, and a little bit of the code here is different. Actually, here specifically on root, not on get. I didn't make many changes on get since the last one, other than adding extra equals extra data on the log. So what is extra data? So extra data is something that you can pass to a log, and based on your choices, that data will be added to the log. But there's some catches, so we'll get to that in a moment. So essentially here I made a few changes. Everything else is similar. I kept this as level 100. I kept this as level 1. I'm actually going to switch this to level 1 because it's actually level 1, not 0. Because 0 doesn't log no matter what, even if your root logger is set to 0. So 1 is effectively the lower bound, not 0. And all of these others are the same, and then I added extra data again here just for having like one endpoint where I can test everything related to logging. So I just, as you remember from last episode, I'm just doing that. So what else has changed? So this is pretty much the same, and extra data, I just define it up here that I can just pass in to everyone else. So set level config and set logging config, there were also some print statements here that I removed because I was just getting, because it was pointless. Now JSON formatter. So this is interesting. This essentially defines our own formatter, which we've imported through logging.formatter. Now, before I get into this and what it does, I'm gonna get into this extra data stuff and how it works and what that giant ass warning that you were seeing when I ran the app, what that was. We're gonna get into that just now. So essentially, if I put this extra data in, right, it's not necessarily gonna get logged. It's not. And to change that, what you really want to do is go to logging config, and essentially you add it to the format. You can see JSON MC here, but we're gonna talk about the stuff that's commented out in a moment. But first, let's just focus on this. Until you add this here, that's not the extra data, which if you go into main, it's essentially path operation and get that root, right? And that's not necessarily always going to be defined, right? But in your formatter, and this is just the basic formatter, this is not me developing a custom formatter, which is what we're going to get into next. This is not a standard log item to be passed. And so what happens when you're running it is essentially this giant ass key error exception wherever path operation is not being passed. So over here you can see that's the same key error, path operation not defined, path operation not defined, formatting field not found in record, path operation, key error, path operation. So this path doesn't exist. Oh, the message still logged. I thought the message doesn't log, but apparently the message still gets logged even with the key error. Let's just confirm that. So hitting the root endpoint, you'll see that there isn't an error for the error critical or level 100, because if you go back to our code, I'm just gonna close the project and env. If you go back to our code, you'll see that this and critical and error don't have path operation defined. So it doesn't throw this giant key error before sending the log, right? And I think this is some sort of exception handling or something that's happened on a lower level. to ensure that the log still comes out even though there's a key error. But then it only gives you the message by the looks of it. I don't know what this arguments thing is. Or maybe this is part of the key error itself. Either way, the log isn't properly done when you have this. So one solution to this is to make sure this is added everywhere. So we're just going to do that really quickly. I'm just going to boom. Oop. Just gonna, no way. Why is this thing complaining? I don't understand why this one's complaining. Oh, I see why. Comma space, and I'm gonna add it here, and I'm gonna add it here. Extra equals. Right, and then well, what's happening? Oh, because extra data is not defined prior to that point. So I'm just gonna do that over there really quickly. And now I'm just gonna force close this thing, clear it, launch it again. Now hopefully, see? Get root, the path operation actually gets added. Remember, we had defined path operation as get root in our extra data that we're adding because it's defined in the format over here. And as you can see, no errors. So I'm just gonna hit up root and all my logs happen. Oh wait, not all my logs happen. Debug doesn't. What happened to my level? Oh, because I think I set it to 10. I think I pumped it up because it was, I was getting some logs that I just didn't really care about and was making it even harder. Let me check the .unv. Yeah, I set it to 10, so that's not on anyone else, right? So now it works fine. But the thing is, if you're gonna be defining like an extra field, right? That could be unique in many situations, or like have it be only existing in certain situations. So it's not really feasible to make sure you have the same keys always passed in, right? And that's where things like custom formatters really come in. So first I'm just going to show you my formatting class, right, before I get into the YAML of it. But the YAML is essentially changing this and defining a new formatter. But before we get into that, and then, you know, passing that new formatter into your handler, et cetera, right? So we'll just get into the, I'm just gonna undo my changes. I'm just gonna, level 1. Okay, yes, because that's a change I actually want to keep. Now, I'm going into, we've already covered set level config and set logging config. Honestly, both of these are probably going to go in the trash bin as in a week or two, maybe tops. It's going to get irritating soon enough. But this is not. So this is my custom formatter that I created with a little bit of help. Like I said, there was like a step-by-step logging. Honestly, there was like a script that ChatGPT spit out at me. I'm like, fucking create coding exercises to get me to recreate the script, and that's where this whole logging thing is happening. And I think there's one thing that set of exercises doesn't go through, which is setting up colors, which is something I definitely want to do because I want different colored logs. Anyways, we'll get to that. So essentially here, we are extending logging's own formatter class, and we're overloading the format class, right? Which essentially just is what is called by the handler, right? It's called by the handler for the formatter, and it's passed a record, which is a logging.record. So anytime I do logger.log or logger.info or debug, it essentially creates what is known as a log record, which is what is then passed to format to actually format it. So I create this neat dict here. Now, as you'll see, I did camel case because it's a JSON formatter, and I intend this to be like, if I end up pushing my logs to other places, just having it be using the accepted standards, if you will, is a good idea in my opinion. So I'm just gonna stick with that. So here we have timestamp. Now I could have just imported from datetime and datetime, but I went into what a logging formatter is and like the kinds of functions it has, and one of the functions it has is format time. So it uses its own date format and returns the formatted time as a string, I believe. Yeah, it returns it as a string, as you can see here. And you pass it the record in self.date format, which seemed like the appropriate thing to do, because if I just do ISO datetime now or something, datetime.now.iso format, something like that, right? Then later on, if I want to extend this, right, by customizing the format time or just changing the date format, it's gonna be a pain. But now all I have to do, because date format is when you okay, class formatter, wait, in the dunder init, you can pass in the date format. So, and I've inherited this, right? So from logging.formatter into JSON formatter. So even though I don't have a dunder init explicitly called, I can instantiate this class with a different date format. So here, over here, we'll get into that. Point is, you can create your own date format, and it's totally fine. It's totally easy. In fact, you know what? We'll probably do that later on in this video. So essentially, I just create a dict with all these different things that are available in the logging record. So the level name is available, the name of the logger, the module name where the log was made, the file name where the log was made, the function name where the log was made, the line number, and the actual message itself. So you get here, the others you're accessing as an attribute. Here you access it as get message, because if you just do not message, you'll get the string literal from which it builds the message, but return the message for this log record after merging any user supplied arguments with the message. So that's why I use get message instead of message. Why that's the case like that, like in which situation you're merging, I'm not sure, but that's the reason you use record.getMessage instead of just doing record.msg, right? And then here in my formatter, if is instance pathop is equal to get attribute record path operation none, which basically says, hey, in the logging record, if this key value is, if this attribute exists, aka path operation, get it for me or give me none. So basically this whole thing what is it? Why did I do comma string? Oh, because it's within is instance, right? That makes a lot of sense. So if it get this thing, if it's there, or return none, and if it's there, check if it's an instance of string, and if it is, boom, we just add it to this dictionary, right? And similarly with exception info, you call self format exception and format the exception, right? So if record exe info is true, like for example here, You can just format that too. And then basically I import JSON. I do JSON dumps to dump all of this into a JSON. I think the default key is, not sure what default is for again. Let me see. Default object is a function that should return a serializable version of object or raise a type error. The default simply raises type error. So this basically, to some extent, helps future-proof it. So that if there is an object that can be serialized to a string, just go ahead and serialize it to a string for me by like just going stir that object, whatever that object is. Many Python objects or classes have a dunder string method or a dunder. Whenever I say dunder, I mean double underscore. So the underscore underscore init underscore underscore is like a really popular one. That's how you initialize a class, initialize an instance of a class. But string, so it'll be like string and that object, so you're like actively trying to cast it. And since most have another magic method called dunder string or dunder stir, str, and there's also dunder wrapper, which is slightly different from dunder stir. It creates, how do I put this? It can be parsed by string, and then that is what is returned, the object from dunder stir, which is a string representation of the object. Now, so dunder string is actually meant for a human readable version of the object. And then there's dunder wrapper, which also returns a string. But the goal, even though this is not necessarily always what happens or is feasible, but the goal if you do dunder wrapper is basically if I do eval wrapper some instance, I'll essentially create a new copy of that instance. So for example, if I initialize this formatter class with date format, if I do wrapper on this object, it'll be something like JSON formatter and then within a parentheses date format equals whatever date format. And then if I run that string into eval, which essentially takes a string and converts it into Python code and execute it, then it'll just create a new instance of JSON formatter, right? So that's what it will do. So that's why you set the default value here, just helps make it easier. And then indent 3 is to just make it all nice and pretty, because like I don't want like just one giant line JSON. I wanted it to be like so it's just pretty that way. And I added the two new lines because it always drives me nuts. I hate when you see logs and it's just wall to wall. I'm like, how is any human being reading this? And I know that this just like setting the indent and adding additional new lines just probably isn't nice for the logging buffer, but whatever. Because there's also a buffer for logging, and I think I forget how exactly, but there's a way to run your app setting I think it's an environment variable. I think it's an environment variable that Python reads from, or is flush buffer or override buffer, something like that. So this might get a bit much for that buffer, but whatever, I don't care. I'll change it when it really needs to be changed. This I'm definitely not changing much of. And so you must be wondering, how do we change that in the logging YAML, and how do we define that? Because here we could just do this, right? So it's right shmeh. So that's how you define the formatter. You put this little parentheses as a key, and that essentially means, hey, I'm gonna give you a class, instantiate this object, aka JSON-MC, the formatter, with this class, and you have to give the full qualified class path, main.json formatter, basically, right? And I believe, I'm just gonna double check this really quickly. Dictionary schema details. I have it like as a pin tab now. I'm just like, this is an important page. Wait, let me go straight to user-defined objects. The ID brief. With these two format strings. and this contains a special key parentheses, which means that user-defined instantiation is wanted. In this case, the specified factory callable will be used. So this is essentially saying, hey, there's a factory code here. Will be used. It is an actual callable that'll be used directly. Otherwise, if you specify a string as in the example, the actual callable will be located using normal import mechanisms. So what that's saying is, like, basically with dict config, when you load it into, like, if you write an encode in Python directly, you can just give dict config the literal objects you care about. But we're loading this from YAML, so probably we can't do that. We have to give it a string, but it'll either way it'll work. Using normal import mechanisms, the callable will be called with the remaining items in the configuration subdirectory as keyword arguments. So basically, everything past the constructor is interpreted as inputs to the constructor, right? So, for example, I'm just going to run this really quickly, show you. Oh, wait. Control C, I want to quit out. Clear this. So I've created this constructor over here, and I've set it in the YAML file, and the constructor is here in my main. I'm just gonna close Dunder in there. I don't know what that's about. And then I set the formatter to JSON MC, right? So this is like basically me saying that, hey, there's this new formatter. I'm gonna call it JSON MC, and that's the formatter you're gonna use, no problem. And then here you can see the results of that here in dev main py. See, my JSON formatter is being used, and boom, I get everything I need. The module, the file name, everything I defined is right there. And if I hit this up, and it also provides a path operation, get root, and when it's not there, it's not throwing a nasty error at me. No problem. It's super awesome. And another thing, so this is essentially the constructor. Everything else past that will go to the constructor. So pay attention to this date format, right? It's this. So we're just gonna pass a object, a thing into this, which is date format, and we're just gonna go %y dot %m dot %d. Oh, we're just gonna switch dots to slashes just to make this easier. I'm just gonna do. This is purely for the sake of showcasing. I'm not actually gonna do this. But I mean, I'm not gonna keep this in my code. I'm just gonna show this to you. So if I quit out now, because so apparently if you launch from UVcorn directly, you can tell it which files to look at for changes, but not through if you run it through FastAPI, which is also still running UVcorn, but just does some wrapping around it. It's a simpler thing. So here you can see my new date format has been picked up. So essentially any arg2 some value, and then arg3 some other value. Basically anything past this within that scope, I guess. I don't know how else to say it. Like within JSON MC, anything past this is interpreted as an argument to be fed into this. We're just gonna delete those because I actually like the default date format. It's nice and detailed, and it's formatted in a way I like. So I'm just gonna remove that, and then we can just gonna go ahead and start up again. I think I need to memorize where the. You know what? Let's just do that live really quickly. Just gonna exit out of this. I think it's uv run uvicorn -h -help. There's a way. Reload dir, set reload directories explicitly instead of using the current working. Set glob pattern to include while watching for files includes star.py by default. These defaults can be overridden with this option has no effect unless watch files is installed. Okay, so reload include, let us see. Reload include glob pattern, so star.y. Actually, I'm not even going to give it a. I'm just going to go logging config .yml. I'm not going to give it a glob. Because what if there's another YAML file somewhere else? I don't know, in the .env, whatever. It would never be changed by me, but I don't know, whatever. I'm just going to give it the explicit one because that's the one I care about. And then -- reload as well because I care about that. And then main app. Oh, it's gonna cause an issue for me because env file is not set. Env file equals 1. And now, hopefully, actually, I'm just gonna go ahead and run it like this first. Right, okay. Application startup complete. Making some changes. Boom, see there's no difference because it only tracks changes in .py files. So, command Z. I'm just gonna remove that. And then we're gonna run it again with include logging config. I'm just gonna update the date format again, date fmt : and we just do %y, which we need to wrap into quotes. Actually, just to be consistent, we're gonna wrap it in double quotes. And boom. Warning, watch files detected, and boom, it's working. So I'm gonna actually save that. Into my useful terminal commands list. Just because I'm getting tired of having to repeatedly restart that. Command Shift 7. I'm just gonna copy paste these two. UVcorn, same reason as above. -- reload. Include files / glob patterns to watch files. -- reload, same as above. -- oops, not -- main : app, same as above. I'm just gonna write that down just to save it. I'm just gonna run the file like that because that makes my life so much easier in terms of showcasing things. So with this, we move on to the next thing over here. So we've described JSON format. We've shown how it works. We've shown how to shown how to actually pass it arguments. I'm just going to remove that actually. Now hopefully this will just restart on its own, and it did not. Wait, I'm just gonna add C, and then Command Shift C. Yep, it's working totally fine. Just gonna remove that. So the next step past this was to overwrite UVcorn's own loggers. So this also led to a different existential crisis because I'm like, what are the logger settings? I wanted to only change the formatter, And basically, there isn't a good way to do just the change on the formatters. So it'd be easy to think, oh, if I do incremental equals true, that would solve all my problems, and that way I can just update UVCon loggers. But essentially, the only thing you can change with incremental true is uh, incremental configuration. Thus, when the incremental key is set up, system will completely ignore any formatters and filters entries and process only the level settings in the handlers and the level and propagate settings in loggers. So those are the only things you can update with incremental. You can't do handlers and formatters and things like that. I don't know if it's a technical limitation or what. It's difficult to provide complete flexibility, for example, because objects such as filters and formatters are anonymous. Once a configuration is set up, it is not possible to refer to such anonymous objects, so there's a bit of a technical limitation there. And also there is not a compelling case for arbitrarily altering the object graph of loggers, handlers, filters, formatters at runtime once the configuration is set up. The verbosity of loggers and handlers can be controlled just by setting levels, and in the case of loggers propagation flags, changing the object's graph arbitrarily in a safe way is problematic in a multi-threaded environment. While not impossible, the benefits are worth the complexity it adds to the implementation. Cool beans. Basically, this is saying there's a bit of a technical limitation because the objects are anonymous, and this is saying that it's also just generically wide, which I kind of get, I guess. At least I think that's what it's saying, right? Why change the inheritance graph and all that, right? That doesn't complicate it and makes no sense as to why. So I was having an existential crisis because I'm like, I just want to keep all of UVcorn settings and just change the handler. Actually, I don't even care about changing the handler. I really specifically care about changing the formatter, but on the logger level, you cannot change the formatter. You can change the handler, and then you can have the handler with the correct formatter that you care about, right? So I went through a bunch of testing. Basically, I had some lines that printed out different capacities of UVcorn. And the thing I couldn't figure out was filters. Is how do you get a logger's filters? I still have not been able to figure that out because I figured out what handlers they were using, etc., etc. It was just a regular handler, so regular STD out or an STD handler, which I then was just like, okay, that part's fine, but what about filters? And then I'm like, what, screw it. I'm just gonna do this, and it's just gonna overwrite everything, and it's totally fine. And what this will mean is that I'm essentially just changing everything about the UVcorn logger. So here, so it's weird, UVcorn access, I think, has propagate set to false, and error has propagate set to true or something like that, and so does ASCII. But that didn't make much sense to me, and I didn't want to define the handlers on these guys and set propagate to false because that didn't make much sense to me. So instead I set all of these to have propagate true. I set UVcorn to false so that it doesn't propagate further. And then I just had the terminal handler, right? So no problem. Because if I set this to true, it's just going to go to the root logger, and I have nothing defined on the root logger. So I personally think that's fine. Because the other way to do it is just to have everything as high up in the hierarchy as possible. So basically have everything set up on root and then inherit from there wherever possible. Which is not necessarily a bad idea, actually. And yeah, from our previous episode, you know that if I set a handler here and here, and this is set to true propagate true, it'll come here to root and it's just going to double log. So we're not going to do that. And I believe propagate handlers level and filters is all you can apply. Root will not have any filters on it, which is fine. I want the level to be not set. That's also fine. Yeah, anyways. I'm actually gonna go ahead and do that. Handlers space, no, tab hyphen terminal, right? And I'm gonna set this to true actually. I think as of right now, that would just mean double logs. Yeah, application started. And then let's just comment that out first. Just gonna restart. Okay, double logging is removed. I'm just gonna it makes sense to me to set everything on root or the highest level thing, because this is the highest level thing, right? Is like things should always be printed to the terminal or logged to the terminal. It should always be there. It makes no sense to not have logs beyond terminal. I mean, if you wanted to also go on PagerDuty and things like that, okay, that then set some custom loggers that essentially allow that to happen. Anyways, so now if we do this and we set this over here, you can see that now everything is in JSON, which is nice. Waiting for application startup complete. I don't understand why I have application startup complete twice here. That doesn't make sense. Oh, that's because I have an additional handler here, which I don't need. Application startup, now we're getting our single logs again. Nice, very nice. We have everything showing up as we want. That's very nice. Now, this neat thing I wanted to point out is UVcorn access. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to, what am I gonna do? I wanted to showcase some stuff about UVcorn specifically. And because you're seeing the UVcorn logs separately now again, because instead of in JSON, because when I commented this back out, I said disable existing loggers to false. And so the original UVcorn loggers are set, and I don't think they propagate, so they're not going to use the root handler, at least the way it's normally set, right? And just gonna vape it up real quick. So essentially, there's a thing. So UVcorn access is a special one. I'm just going to showcase what that means. UVcorn error and ASCII. ASCII, I'm not really sure exactly what it does, and it's just the UVcorn logger. I don't want to talk about these, but access I do want to talk about. Because what is the access log? So if I hit bam, right, I hit this endpoint, I got all these prints. This thing right here, that's actually UVcorn access. And if you don't believe me, here, I'm just going to do this and do -- no access log. Right? Error number 48 already in use. Control Z. Oh, I hit Control Z instead of Control C, and I think that turned it in a headless mode, so it's just running in the background. So I'm just gonna go ahead and close this terminal, terminate this, start up a new one, and put it back over to Shmeh. CD projects, yeah, so this is the one, and add, access log. So now, if I hit this endpoint, remember how earlier at the end we were getting the get endpoint blah blah blah? That's no longer shown. Trace back most recent call. Oh, that was close. This is the fake stack that I had. Right? So that's where this is fixed. That's what access log is. Right? And the thing is, now that you're thinking, okay, I'm running no access log, so that means if I do this, the access log is still going to be off, right? But is it? So we hit up this endpoint, and boom, the access log is back there. uvicorn.access is there, because that when you're disabling existing loggers, when you set no access log, that logger doesn't exist, but it's there in code, right? So in uvicorn's code, the access logs are still there, right? So when I just set this up and set propagate to true, I still have those access logs. So even if I launch it with the no access log flag, and essentially just disables its own access log, but then you can kind of recreate it in a way. So that was like a thing that I was having a bit of a breakdown about, like earlier today when I was looking at it. I was like, this is confusing. Why is this showing access logs when I have no access logs? And I realized it's essentially because I'm creating in here. So I think that is everything. I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup right in front of you guys. We're just going to go ahead and remove that, and we're going to keep this. And here is me talking about, because I was having a major malfunction, and I think right now this makes sense to me. Just have everything propagate and just set the handlers and stuff on root, with the only difference being that levels themselves can be set on these loggers itself, so that not everything is being sent to root, which I am doing already in my code in a shitty way, but I'm still doing it. I will eventually just migrate all that stuff here and set it in my code to, pick up the appropriate config from this file, right? So let me just reread this. You know what? I'm just gonna remove this comment because it's kind of pointless. I'm just gonna do a little bit more cleanup. Is there anything else in main that I want to clean up? No, I already added this line here. Is that my only change? Yeah, I think that's my only change in this file. It's just this being switched to level 1. And then logging config has a few changes. So I'm just gonna go ahead and commit that. Actually, I'm just gonna do this in a new tab rather than relaunching the app again and again. Git commit -m. I could do this in that thing, but I prefer to do it here. Removed changes to logging config YAML. I'm just gonna add another line to this message. What do I want to add to this message? Moved handler to root and set everything to propagate. Added terminal handler to root. Added terminal handler to root. Removed on comments regarding plans with UBcorn loggers. And finally, I'm just gonna hit -A preemptively so that when I hit enter, it'll be fine. Changed level from 0 to 1 on first log in root directory. In root path op function. Log message. Boom. All right. Okay, that's, I think, this video. Kind of uneventful and a little bit boring. It's really, it took me like a significant amount of my time prior to this was just spent on understanding the access log thing as to why it was showing up and all that. There's a lot of weird playing around code stuff that I didn't, and I should have just recorded it then and there, and it would have been easier to explain what it was, but such is life. Anyways, I think we're pretty close to the end here. I think there's a few other things I need to do, but then we're done with logging, at least in the short term. I'm sure we'll come back and make it more, add handlers and things like that, but in terms of the essence of how much logging we need or how much control over logging we need for the purposes of further development, I think we'll be done over the course of the next few videos tops, which I'm hoping to do within the next 24-ish hours, but I mean, you guys won't see it in the next 24 hours, but I'm hoping to be done within the next 24 hours. Let's see how that goes. All right, take care, everyone. Bye.